Good evening. This intro also doesn't work when I'm not wearing Viva Fry merch. Today it's Style Boys. I'm a style boy for life. Lonely Island pop star, keep on keeping on. This is Winston. Sorry, that might have been too close. How's the audio? This is Winston nibbling my ear to the dismay of some, to the joy of others. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Stuff's going down in Ottawa, and it's what a time to be alive. All right, let me just get the lighting here good enough. Get these dogs out of here. What is this? We've been using the office for kitty stuff. So apparently word on the street is that this is according to Ezra Levant, Rebel News. If you don't follow them, I don't know who is watching that doesn't follow them or know of them. People who would call themselves journalists, I still refuse to call myself a journalist, are on the site. And apparently, so for those of you who don't know, if you're new to the channel from the Ottawa stuff, Sunday nights are for the discussion of all things legal. Robert Barnes, world-class, amazing civil rights attorney in the United States. Talking to the new faces here, we talk about all subject matter. For those of you who have been here for a while, you also know that I've been in Ottawa Monday, Wednesday, Friday night, Saturday, just documenting. I mean, I'm not journalizing or being a journalist, or maybe I am. Just documenting what's going on. This what's being described as violence, intolerance, extremism, what some are equating to the January 6th insurrection. The camera's going to start slowly falling down because the tape on the wall is coming off. I spent the week in Ottawa, 4 days, easily, let's see, 6.5, 11, 12, 13, 14, 20 hours of streaming. I'm rounding up just because it's a nice number. And you all saw it in real time. Nothing could be described as violent in this. It is certainly annoying. It is certainly noisy during the day and possibly at night. It is certainly disruptive in a non-criminal sense, as, meaningful protests are supposed to be, like the mostly peaceful but somewhat fiery protests where they burn down cities for a week. That's disruption taken to the next level. This is just, disruption, which is what it's intended to be, but targeted disruption because it's on Parliament Hill by and large with some spillover. Am I not in focus? Sorry, hold on. Okay, let's get the lighting there. Not in focus. And I was in Ottawa all week, reading the news, reading the people calling it outright lies. And saw it for myself, was not what the media was saying. And when a week of solid demonizing either didn't work or maybe it had enough of an effect, now they've declared a state of emergency in Ottawa, apparently, and have brought in the police to arrest. It was supposed to be as of midnight to arrest anyone bringing supplies or what's the word? Not food and supplies, but logistics or aid and support to the truckers. And apparently they've, from what the word is, they've started arresting people 5 hours early. Greetings from Pantelis Nation is in the house. Loved your recent episode on his podcast. Pantelis, amazing. I call him the Canadian Joe Rogan because he carries a conversation the way Joe Rogan does. Delivery, insight, humor, all of it. Pantelis, if you don't follow him on YouTube, I did a podcast with him this week, and it's to talk about this madness. So I spent 4 days walking Ottawa, and we're witnessing something monumental that's acquiring a momentum that is, increasingly exponential, but that has its risks because at some point it's gonna hit a wall of something. It's gonna hit a wall of, okay, let's do this and let's compromise and let's roll things back and get back to normal life. Or if you're a tyrannical government who doesn't like negotiating with the lowly hoi polloi, and you don't like being perceived as having caved to the demands of the people, and I mean the actual people, you bring in the police and you come in heavy-handed. We're going to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to try to get back tomorrow and just do exactly what I've been doing. My plan was definitely to go back on Thursday and possibly meet some people. My plan was to go back and have discussions with business owners as to whether or not the disruption has been what some are saying it is. And now it looks like I might just go back and walk and see what's going on. Viva, when you speak to someone on the street, you sometimes start in French, other times in English. How do you decide? I see what accent they have. And if I detect a French Canadian accent, I try to switch to French, if for no other reason than just to show them that I'm bilingual. And then it's the irony. Like sometimes when people start speaking to you in French and they see that I have an English accent in French, they'll switch to English. And it's the beautiful thing. It's a question of pure courtesy among Canadians who are trying to go out of their way to speak the language that they think is familiar with the other person they're speaking with. I like to show people that I can speak French, and sometimes, someone's English is not as good as their French and vice versa. And so both parties try to accommodate. False flags are coming. There was a funny one that Rebel News posted of a person literally like trying to feign one of those, stereotypical Russian fake car accidents where, but for the fact that everyone has a dash cam, they like walk out, the car stops, and then they roll over the hood and roll onto the ground, start screaming. Literally, they just posted a video of that. I retweeted it. It's the fight gets dirty. When you fight corruption, corruption fights back. Whoever can remind me of who said that in the chat, that would be great. Is there any, I don't know that there's going to be an intro rant. I'll take some super chats. Standard disclaimer, people. Oh, I'll get you one rant. Standard disclaimer, no legal advice, no medical advice, no election fortification advice. Now there's a lot of people out there, new faces who are watching. I'm a lawyer. I don't practice anymore. So don't ask me legal questions by email. I have a standard response, but I'll just say this, periodically. I do not give legal advice, and I do not take new mandates. Part of it is because I can't stand the practice. I could never stand the practice. Part of it now is I'm going to be a liability of an attorney for any client in front of a judge because of my public persona, the positions I've taken. I'm not going to be a Brian Peckford, who is a respected citizen, author of the 1982 Constitution. When he goes to court as a plaintiff or as an attorney, he will not be written off by any judge as an eccentric, whatever other word you want to go in there. So please don't email me mandates. Don't email me details and ask me for stuff. I don't do it. I can't do it. If I thought I think I'm doing better for what I know that I can contribute to the world doing this. Is there legal action in the city with the cops arresting fuel bringers for heat, but also all of the hotel rooms? Nowhere to go in the cold. This is my fear. They want the situation to escalate. And my fear is someone's going to freeze to death in their car. In Montreal, it was about a year and a half ago. It was last winter when they were shutting down homeless shelters because of COVID, because it was dangerous to allow homeless people into homeless shelters. An indigenous homeless man died in a porta potty, freezing to death because the government, in all its infinite wisdom, said COVID is so damn dangerous, we're shutting down homeless shelters. And now they're they did it over the weekend. I am certain there's a lawsuit in there. Expedia, unilaterally canceling all reservations, and they flip you an email as if that sometimes doesn't go to your spam, or maybe you don't notice it. This happened to us. Our Expedia reservation Friday night was canceled unilaterally. The excuse given, I don't believe it for a second, but they said, no staff shortages. They can't accommodate you. Exceptional circumstances, cancellation, refund. Rumor has it, according to Rebel News, the government had bought out or occupied hotel rooms, vacant hotel rooms, so that people could not book. But there's no doubt I believe there's a lawsuit there. Who are you going to sue? You'd have to sue the private enterprises or the hotels for failing to honor their obligations and a class action for nominal damages, but on a class scale. Can't sue the government. Thank you for the coverage. Thank you for your coverage of the trucker convoy. Been following you for 2 years now. Viva for PM. I don't want to be PM. I think I think I've learned my lesson. Here we go. But thank you very much for the support. Alert, alert. Ottawa just announced state of emergency. They're going to start rounding up people and sending them. Okay, well, I'm not reading that part, but they've declared a state of emergency. So the first half of that is accurate. And apparently they were going to start arresting people, bringing in supplies and sustenance for the truckers or for the protesters as of midnight. Apparently they had to bump that up because it's such a serious state of emergency. The tape I hold my camera to the wall with is falling down. No, I don't. It was not intended to be a grift. I'm extremely fortunate for what's been going on here. This is my setup of the camera on the wall. Let me just back it up. There we go. That's my setup. It's a $75 Vittad camera taped to the wall. The tape has been doing very well, so I can't complain. And I certainly cannot complain about the wild support which I've been trying to give back in my own ways. I don't publicize those things, but I've been doing my best to give back to, as a result of the good fortune that this community has brought. I couldn't be there in Quebec City due to an unexpected event. From what I've seen, it was a huge and peaceful party. I hope I'll be there next weekend. Yeah, that's it. I got to bounce between Ottawa now and Quebec City. Oddly enough, Quebec City is further away from Montreal than Ottawa. Please say your location more often when you are streaming. Looked for you Friday and Saturday. Hopefully you are back next weekend. People are using creative ways of finding me based on where I am in Ottawa. But here we go. Yeah, this is it, eh? This is it. I cut a 34-minute highlight of yesterday's stream, and it took me 3.5 hours to put the damn subtitles in the video, and I'm sure it's loaded. Comme on dit en français, c'est bourré de fautes d'orthographe. It's gonna have typos. It's gonna be loaded with typos. I got so freaking frustrated doing that this morning, but I had to get it out. So I put out the highlight of my discussion, interview, discourse with the counter protesters, who someone said you have to forgive them and you have to pray for them because they are victims of this in as much as everyone else. Part of me thinks some of them might, could legit be government actors, just legit government cheerleaders, paid or not, who are out there like, rah, 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 here's some propaganda. Part of me thinks that. Having spoken to them, the better half of my brain thinks they are just in a state of terror, and Stockholm Syndrome is a real thing. I don't want to miss the Cornelius Buttknuckle. Viva, thank you for your coverage of what's going on in Ottawa. Right now, your voice and your coverage may be more important than anyone yet realizes. Keep up the good work, and much love from your southern neighbors in the States. Thank you very much, Cornelius Buttknuckle. And I'll see if I can find that chat to bring it up. Viva, you have a video with interviews from counter-protesters. You are a journalist. How about I'm just a human? I actually genuinely want to hear what they have to say. What I found thoroughly, not eye-opening because I've known it is, but I found it thoroughly enriching, educational, is one of the protesters who seemed to be the ringleader or the master of the other protesters would not let them discourse with me. Now, admittedly, she might view me with the same stink eye that I view the CBC. So if someone's going to go give an interview to the CBC, I'm going to say, dude, watch out. They're going to use it against you. They're going to try to make you look like a buffoon. I'm down here, dude. They're going to make you look like a buffoon. Be wary. I would say the same thing. But when something is live and unedited, I would have less of a fear of that. But I can understand the fear. She thinks I'm the enemy. Fine. But like the irony was that this woman who is counter-protesting to tell other people what they have to do with their bodies is telling the counter-protesters what they can do with their mouths. And she got to a few of them, but I had a discussion with a few of them. Grand jury, Deholt, let me see what this says. Okay. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to bring it down here. Man, I thought, okay, I'm not going to mention these words. You don't want to upset the overlords here. Okay, the chats are coming in too fast, and I'm not going to be able to do it. Politics ruins everything. There is no... I just hope politics has not ruined me. I don't think it has. I think it's made me cynical. It's made me a little upset, and I'm genuinely afraid for what the future of Canada holds, because even if this all goes back to normal tomorrow, and I was telling someone this, like, okay, I'm still reassessing. Even if this goes back to normal tomorrow, that is like, being in an abusive relationship where after being abused, they either, legitimately or, dishonestly say, I'll never do it again. Trust me. It was the thing with a dog. Once a dog bites you, it doesn't matter if the dog is never going to bite you again. You're never going to put your face near that dog's face ever again and not have the fear that the dog's going to bite you. And that's not a healthy relationship, period. And that is what the government has done now. I can never look at this government again and have confidence in my heart, even if they abolish everything tomorrow, that they don't think they have the right to do it again at any point in the future. Was awesome meeting you downtown yesterday. Went hoping to see you and got to shake your hand. Best moment of the weekend. Thanks, Viva. Wishmaster Brazen. Let me see if I can recognize you from the avatar. I can't, but it was nice. It was just wonderful meeting everybody, even the counter protesters. So it's Here, let's see here. So apparently cops are mass mobilizing to shut down the protest tonight by force. And this is when, okay, I mean, fingers crossed, but cutting off fuel, I was just thinking strategically, what's that going to do? You're going to end up having a bunch of stalled trucks that you're going to have to tow out one by one. That'll take a week on its own, assuming you can even find tow trucks. I want to hope that there's going to be a moment of solidarity between the police, between the between the people, the backbone of society, and the authorities. I want to hope that there's going to be that moment, but I'm not black-pilled. I'm just close. Your clip of the counter protesters was fantastic. How many times did they say, "Don't talk to him. He was with the unclean ones"? They didn't say the unclean ones, but they said, "You're with the convoy." I was like, ideologically, I'm undoubtedly on that side, but like, even if I were an organizer, like they are suspecting in me of the exact tricks that they are playing, and that's why they're suspicious of me, because they're afraid I'm going to do something to take it out of context, to ridicule them or to mock them, because that is what they do and that's how they operate. And I'm not talking about the left at large, the counter protesters and the people there, all masked, by the way, all covering their faces outdoors. Heroes showing up to literally protest for more government oppression that they think is just justified this time. All masked, except that one guy who said that he'll support the BLM protest because it's a good protest, but he won't support the bad protest. So he was counter protesting because this protest bad, his protest good. And they were so ill-informed. BLM protests don't last for days and occupy city. I was like, are you on this earth? And another woman, the woman who I interviewed, the elderly lady, who ultimately confessed she doesn't trust big pharma either, didn't know that the vaccine company, the pharma companies, required immunity in order to do this. Didn't know that. So missing a relevant piece of information for determination of decisions, especially admitted that she doesn't, especially given that she admitted she does not trust big pharma. But my ultimate conclusion, by the way, I put it on Twitter. That woman who was trying to stop everyone from talking to me, yeah, sure, it's because they don't want to interact. I think it's more that the more any one of these individuals talks on an individual basis, the more likely it is that they say something that will get them canceled with their own gang. The elderly lady who said, "I don't trust big pharma," if the others hear that, she'll get chewed out by her own revolution. The guy who ultimately admitted that he agrees with some of the protesters' positions, but not the method, canceled. Like, these people can't speak because they will say things that will get them eaten by their own revolution. That was my ultimate takeaway. Question, is this a question? I don't know. You tell me. Is it? What movie was it with Bruce Willis where she says, "Why do you always answer a question with a question?" And he says, "Do I?" All right. I'm not going to be able to keep up with the super chats. So final disclaimer. We are simultaneously live streaming on Rumble. And by the way, yesterday, I think we had over 30,000 people watching the protest in real time between Rumble and YouTube, and amazing participation on Rumble, which is just fantastic. So if I don't get you a super chat and you're going to be miffed, do not give a super chat. I don't like people feeling miffed, rooked, shilled, whatever. YouTube takes 30% of super chats. If you don't like that, Rumble has Rumble Rants. They take 20%. So you can feel good supporting a creator, supporting the company, yada, yada. Best bang for your buck if you want to support us in what we do. vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And with that said, without further ado, Mr. Barnes himself is in the house. Robert, how goes the battle?
Good.
Everyone in the audio, everyone in the chat, let me know if the audio is good. Levels on both of our sides. Robert, can you believe what you're witnessing going on in Canada?
Oh yeah, it's great. It's great to watch.
They've it looks like they're bringing in the heavy well, I won't say heavy artillery, but the big guns tonight, or at least the big men with guns. We'll see what's going to happen. I might have to jump down tomorrow morning. But yeah, they will bring the full weight of the government down on the protests if y'all must hold the line. Well, Robert, I mean, let's you know what, before we even get in, you got a book by Reagan behind you, or a book of Reagan. Book recommendation of the week, what's it about? Cigar recommendation, and then you've got to update our new fans in Canada on what's going on in the States, on the battle that you're waging.
Sure. So this is a book, a sympathetic biography of President Reagan by Larry Schweikert. It was a gift that he sent me. And so it's a good sort of for those that want to see the pro-Reagan perspective. it's a good biography on Reagan. And it really explains sort of the Reagan supporters' perspective on his presidency pretty well. And so and then this is it's named for one of my favorite streets in Paris. You would be able to pronunciate it better than I. Quai d'Orsay
Oh,
cigar, which is very good.
Quai d'Orsay, people, is the docks of Dorsey. So Quai is Quai. When I lived there, I lived on Boulevard Saint-Michel. That was protest central. Like literally every Saturday, a protest going down. They called it Boule Mich. And when they protested, people, they did not leave the streets cleaner than they came, unlike Ottawa.
Well, that's one of the countries that has become expert at trucker protest, farmer protest. They'll just go to the streets, take over various side roads, country roads, dump produce. The French don't lack for dramatic in the way they protest. And they, in fact, were protesting along with the Dutch, along with people around the world, joining the Canadian trucker convoy. There's discussions in the States of doing the same. Already happened in Holland. Being discussed in places all around the world. So it shows what, one small protest can spark a global movement.
It's amazing. Yeah, it was great. I mean, I just talking to those truckers, my bottom line takeaway, and I hate it, it's that the elite, everyone out there who's the counter protesters, the government, the people who are saying, shut up and deliver, they look at these working class people and say, you are unable to know what is best for you. Shut up and drive. And I'm talking to them. They're just good people. They're good people with modest lives and modest expectations out of life. They don't ask for much. They just ask to be left alone. And man, they're loyal, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. All right, Robert.
I mean, playing hockey, having fun with music, keeping everything nice and polite. Very Canadian style, but also the right way. I mean, the sort of an old school protest mechanism, which is rather than burn things down like BLM did, even though one of the people who tried to burn down a building got straight probation this week. How nice it is to have the right politics in America's criminal justice system these days. But it shows that the more effective way is to do protest cheerfully, protest in a civil manner, tends to be a lot more effective. And all of the media lies and Trudeau lies got rather quickly exposed. And Trudeau's now a meme joke, which is not the place you want to be if you're prime minister of a country.
Well, if anybody's watching, I'm going to do the trucker thing. And if anybody doesn't know, I taught my kids at an early age. If you go like this, the trucker's horns are on a rope on the side and they pull it. And when your kid's in a car, their minds will be blown the first time it actually happens successfully. Yeah, no, it's what's amazing, Robert, about this protest is that it was peaceful, but it was kept peaceful by the protesters themselves. And there were incidents, the odd incidents of those flags. We talked about it. The protesters were the ones to say, get out. Don't be here with this. This is not what it's about. They're cleaning the streets, literally. They're shoveling the snow, literally. And it was the most festive and inspiring thing I've ever seen. But look, life comes at Canadians fast, and we're going to see what's going to happen because the government has a way of escalating when they dig in their heels because they've been humiliated as they have. Speaking of which, Robert, what's new on the front in the United States and the lawsuits that you're involved in and following as relates to vaccine mandates, Bobby Kennedy, all those things? What's the good word?
Well, I mean, the most interesting one this week really was the GoFundMe deciding to first announce that they were going to not give the money over to the truckers. And then second, deciding that they were going to announce that they were not going to automatically refund the money to the donors. And then third, said that they're actually just going to steal the money and give it to the charities of their choice, depending on the timing of when people affirmatively requested donations. This is different than what they've done in some high-profile cases in the past. In the Rittenhouse case, funds got refunded automatically when they shut that down. When they shut down Build the Wall, they actually negotiated with the Build the Wall people to avoid litigation. Not only did they refund the money, but they turned over their donor list to the Build the Wall, which was just fine by the Build the Wall folks. So here, their attempts to do something dramatically different backfired fast thanks to the court of public opinion, because here's where the legal risk they potentially faced. There are three categories of people who could have brought legal action. One is the donors, on the grounds that their monies had been misappropriated, contrary to their intentions and in breach of their terms of service. Second would be by the people who set up the donation fund for the intended purposes it had. And third were the truckers and the intended beneficiaries of those funds. And the problem for GoFundMe is that the truckers, the intended beneficiaries of the funds, are not signatories to any GoFundMe contract. So they could bring their own class action on their own grounds in multiple nations in the United States and Canada, depending on where they're located. My understanding is some of the truckers are not from Canada. Almost all of them are, but a few are not. But they could still bring action in the United States if they wanted to. The fact they're in Canada doesn't limit them. It'd be whichever jurisdiction they would find the most friendly and favorable. They could bring a potential claim, given that GoFundMe is based out of the United States. So that would be the risk for GoFundMe, is the class action claim from the truckers, intended beneficiaries, as third-party intended beneficiaries, the diversion of their funds. Plus, they probably had a reasonable reliance interest, because some of these truckers understood that their expenses and costs would be reimbursed. They wouldn't be out of pocket. They wouldn't be broke because of this, based on GoFundMe promoting and supporting and profiting from this fundraiser. So I believe they would have some legitimate claims in equity, which apply in both Canada and the United States, as former British, as borrowing from the British traditions. Probably not in Quebec, I guess, because Quebec's a statutory jurisdiction, right?
Yeah, but it's the statutory follows the common law. I mean, look, the laws are the same across Canada. It's just how they're written and how they're codified, which is different. But Robert, so for anybody who missed the beginning, it was the second time GoFundMe froze the charity, and this is why, Robert, also I think that their behavior was double fraudulent, because they originally froze it at 4.8 million. They said, we're freezing it because you haven't provided a direction as to how the funds are going to be used. They satisfied that, and GoFundMe unfroze it, which is tacit if not implicit, or implicit if not tacit recognition that we're good to go. People can go ahead and donate again. Then they freeze it a second time. We can get into the government pressure side of this afterwards, whether or not they are something of a state actor. I know people want to raise that argument, because they did buckle under political pressure coming from government officials. They froze it a second time, and then issued a bullshit statement, which I shared on my Twitter, because I got the email. It said, what started off as a peaceful protest has now morphed into something different. After receiving multiple reports of incidents from the police, we are refunding all of the monies. This was after saying, if you want your money back, ask for a refund, and if not, we'll give it to a charity of our choice. Then they said a charity of the truckers' choice. Then they just went with that. So, I mean, what do you make of that argument? That when they froze it the first time, said provide direction, and they did, and then they unfroze it. That's like explicit confirmation that it's an okay charity going forward. Yay or nay?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the fact, there was plenty of public attention brought to it, so they knew what it was for, they knew what it was intended to, and it didn't breach their terms of service. And pretending it was somehow an occupation. And the problem for them here, GoFundMe is based in the Bay Area, run by a bunch of hardcore lefties. Usurping a platform that was supposed to be, again, politically neutral. In my view, violation of the Unruh Act in California, which governs them because they're based in California, is the problem they have is Chaz. Not only did GoFundMe support and allow fundraising, to my knowledge, to this day, for the Chaz Chop, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, the Capitol Hill Occupied Property, whatever they wanted to call it, in Seattle, but they went and affirmatively promoted it on their social media. So for them to suddenly say, and that was an actual occupation, not the protest taking place by the truckers in Canada. That was an actual occupation where they foreclosed and stopped and prohibited police from entering. They legally, physically took over the property. And yet to this day, GoFundMe was promoting it, not just allowing funds for it, promoting it and propagating it. So for them to suddenly claim, this trucker thing, that goes past our limits. No, it doesn't. And everybody knows it doesn't. And they have written documentary proof it didn't.
When could, in theory, GoFundMe ever become liable for damage caused through the funds that were given to any entity? Like, hypothetically, GoFundMe allows funds to be raised for an outright terrorist organization, and they carry out an act. Can the victims of that act say, okay, you tolerated this, you facilitated this, we're going to go after GoFundMe? What would be required to take that kind of action?
That's actually been litigated in some other contexts, and Section 230 immunizes them in the United States. Twitter facilitated terrorism, and the argument, the complaint was that they knowingly facilitated terrorism. The court said, nah, they're immune, Section 230. So that's the extraordinary thing. Now, there's a bunch of Canadian claims could be brought where Section 230 does not apply, of course. But in the United States, the other people could bring claims as the donor organization that set it up, and secondly, the donors. Now, the issue would be whether or not both of them, as signatories to the GoFundMe terms of service, would have to go through individualized arbitration. My view is there were credible arguments to get around that, but it would be an uphill battle. The way the American courts love arbitration, it's a terrible system in my view, but they love it and they force it upon people routinely and regularly. But upon occasion, in a select case, right court, right facts, you have an argument to even bring a class action under those circumstances. But the other problem is, in order to get these class action waivers in their terms of service and mass arbitration, in order to make that legal under California law, you have to agree to pick up the price of the arbitration. And so as a person filing a claim, you can either you can in certain circumstances claim you are don't have the money in order to pay, and sometimes get a waiver of the filing fee. But the most you would be obligated to is $250. But on average, a consumer arbitration costs at least $10,000. So if the 10,000 people filed 200 separate, independent, individual arbitration claims, which cannot be aggregated because of because of GoFundMe's own terms of service to prohibit class actions, they could be out $10 million plus in cost. So the way all of this developed was, first, ordinary everyday people made a big stink about it everywhere they could and every platform they could. Then those of us who are lawyers escalated it again, suggesting legal action be taken, suggesting criminal investigations be looked at, class actions be pursued, etc. So that, gave it certain legal validity to others who follow us. That led to Senate candidates like Blake Masters and J.D. Vance, and congressional candidates like Patrick Witt and like Joe Kent and some others promoting it aggressively, saying criminal investigation should be looked at, as well as major legal action taken and laws reformed if there's no legal remedy currently in the United States. That led to actual action by state attorney generals. You had 5 different state attorney generals within 24 hours, including Texas, Florida, and West Virginia, and 2 other states, ask for people to notify them and say, we're opening up a criminal case, we're opening up a consumer fraud case. All of a sudden, GoFundMe found Jesus and said, we didn't really mean we were going to steal the money. In fact, we're going to be sending it back to you right now, right? We're hitting the keys, automatic refund as quickly as they could to try to get out of that problem. They're still not fully out of the woods because of what they did, but they limited the scope of their civil liability and limited their scope of their criminal accountability by taking such quick action. But the fact that a company that big, of that scale, could reverse that fast tells you the effect of people in the court of public opinion. And increasingly, the people that are following this chain of ordinary people to, in this particular context, because it's a legal issue, to lawyers who have substantial followings, to Senate candidates and House candidates who are expected to win or to be competitive. And then that it now translates into attorney generals taking quick action. And then we're seeing a pattern of this occurring. Is a very promising sign for holding some of these big tech companies accountable. You're on mute.
Yeah, let the boomer enter the chat. One question I had: when you give, you can tip GoFundMe. Nobody should ever tip GoFundMe. I mean, no one should ever use it again. But do they reimburse the tip? And I don't know what ancillary charges might exist even for a refund. Does anyone know in the chat if they refund the tip as well? Just one question out there. But
I don't think they do, but I don't know for sure. That's part one. They might should here, because there'll be an allegation of fraud for them promoting this and keeping any monies at all, and then unjust enrichment claims would exist. The second aspect is that the other thing this did is give a huge boost to a man we met at the Project Veritas event, which is the founder of Give, Send, Go, which quite strikingly, a good number of people, despite Give, Send, Go, stepped into the breach and helped out substantially in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, raised close to $1 million for Kyle. That ended up being useful in the bail arguments that got him back a lot of those funds. But a lot of people were still unaware of it. and now a lot more people are aware of it. There were DDoS attacks and other attacks on their servers. And so then Rumble stepped in, and Rumble made sure that everything could get fluid. And so all they're doing, kind of like what folks are trying to do with Joe Rogan, is promote independent, free tech is what I'm going to start calling it. Free tech platforms that are much better than these big institutional monopolists are.
Yeah, and by the way, there's the Streisand effect is not always bad. GoFundMe is going to reimburse my donation. Well, I donated to give Send Go for the convoy, like in the order of 10 times more than 10 times more than my original donation. And I'm not the only person that's doing that. I've seen some tweets and gotten some messages of people saying, yeah, now thank you very much, GoFundMe. I've tripled my donation to give Send Go. And people are going to go there and they're going to see it's a Christian website, Christian fundraiser. I don't know what restrictions there are on the types of fundraisers that they will or will not allow based on their religious ideological leanings. But one thing's for certain, you'll know from the get-go so that you won't get screwed like this because of an arbitrary or capricious decision in the midst. It'll be clear, baked into the terms from the beginning, I presume. If I'm wrong, I'll correct myself. But unlike GoFundMe, which they literally buckled to the pressure, and you literally had the police chief of Ottawa taking credit for the fact that this occurred. It's the next level of corruption. They don't even let the people support a groundswell movement. Try to ignore, try to minimize, try to demonize, and then you try to starve. I mean, this is the way it's going, and they're, by all accounts, now they're trying to freeze and starve out the participants. And I got to tell you, I have bad thoughts in my head, and I don't want to say them out loud to put the juju out there in the universe, but this is not going to work on these people. So they're going to sit in their trucks. They're going to run out of diesel, and you think you're going to starve them out? It's like the British in Braveheart, where they said, like, if we can't root them out, we'll breed them out. Like this is the way the government here thinks. If we can't coerce them out, we're going to starve them out and freeze them out, and it's atrocious. But GoFundMe. Do you think, are we going to see lawsuits, Robert? Because I mean, I know America's more litigious than Canada. Do you think and there were American donors. Do you think we're going to see a lawsuit?
Well, I mean, there probably still will be, but it'll probably be through the arbitration process. There may be some people who try to challenge the arbitration process, but they substantially limited the scope of their liability by automatically refunding everything quickly once they realize the legal exposure they face. Because the other thing people can do that Tim Pool put out there is say, look, I feel defrauded, notify their bank and request a chargeback, and the chargeback cost GoFundMe has to pay. And that can accumulate substantial monies in a very short time period. So I think it just shows how out of touch GoFundMe is, and it shows the increasing power of collective action against even these big monopolists.
I actually called the credit card company and asked what a chargeback was, and they said, we don't know what a chargeback is, but if you want to claim fraud, and if they don't reimburse you, then we will investigate, and it'll take 30 to whatever days. And I was like, okay, by that time, they will have reimbursed me, so maybe I'm going to have no cause of investigation even by my credit card. But I called up, spent a little time on hold Saturday morning. And yeah, Give Send Go was overloaded. I mean, my goodness, I tried for about a good hour Friday night, and then I finally got through at some point Friday night, Saturday morning. Robert, unless we have more on this, I got my own. This was going to be my opening rant, but it's going to fit into this. Speaking of big tech being criminals. So I streamed yesterday for 4 hours, and I monetized the stream. It was monetized, and I have no qualms about that. But then it got claimed. It got claimed by Warner Music Group. And I knew it was happening in real time when I was going through the crowd and they were playing We're Not Going to Take It. And ordinarily I make the joke, and then I just didn't make it that time. But Warner Music claimed the entire 4-hour live stream for copyright claim based on what they identified literally as 12 seconds of audio, which was background audio of the protest. I was going to contest the claim by copyright, and I want to ask you that first question as to whether or not I would have had a legitimate claim, because I do appreciate it was the chorus, it was the distinctive part of the song, and it was in there. You could hear it. I decided not to file a copyright dispute. I just said I'll mute the audio. It's an option on YouTube. Mute the audio. It took YouTube 20 hours to process that mute, during which time 100 some odd thousand views on that video accrued. And I imagine, I presume, maybe I'm wrong, and I'll update. I presume those views are going to go to Warner Music until YouTube was able to successfully mute the audio of that 12 seconds. So that is like the weaponizing of the copy troll. My thought in my head was, one day big tech are going to sponsor protests so they can then claim all video footage of those protests because of the music or copyright materials playing in the background. Wait for it. It will happen one day if it's not already happening. So two-part question, Robert. Would I have had a legitimate claim to claim a copyright dispute as in fair use or incidental or de minimis use because it was in the background?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think this is essentially a lot of these big copyright entities have computerized algorithms that somehow are working with YouTube because they're able to track and trace this. I sort of tested this out. I had a very small video channel that I just put stuff up very occasionally. And the main reason was I wanted to see in part how YouTube operates. And so what was interesting is I once talked about an episode of Vice, but I didn't show anything from the actual episode, didn't broadcast anything. And yet it got copyright hit. It said, "Oh, you need to remove this video because you have." And I was like, "Okay." So simply by talking about it, somebody thought that. I was like, "That means nobody watched this. This was simply a computerized algorithm." And I was curious, how are they running an algorithm with YouTube? I mean, it has to almost be with YouTube. And so YouTube's sort of cooperating at some level with this is my read on it, unless I misunderstand the technology, which is always possible. It's not as bad as my pronunciation of Sasquatchin or however Sasquatch. I can't say it at all. But but otherwise, in my view, is this is abuse of the copyright laws, because usually playing just a small amount of the music is not a problem. It's if you play the whole song and you're profiting from playing the song, clearly not profiting from the song being in the background. So I think there's all kinds of issues with that. And I think and the problem is our copyright laws right now are written too friendly and favorably to the copyright holder and not enough to deal with the problem of copyright trolls. And I think that legal part of that is because the courts have undermined the existing legislation, but part of that is likely needs to be remedied by existing legislation. And so I think that will be part of it because there's too much of it, way too much of it, way too much abuse of copyright assertions.
No, and I'm not greedy. I'm actually very thankful for everything, but I would have sooner demonetized that video than make money from Warner Music to go and claim 4 hours of me freezing my fingertips off because 12 seconds, and then I was going to do the copyright dispute. But then if that gets rejected, then that's it. Then no brainer. So I just figured I'd mute it. But it conveniently took YouTube 20 hours. I had to get on chat with them this morning. I was like, guys, can you make sure that goes through? Because I would have I should have removed all ads from it in the meantime, but I didn't think that far ahead because I was just flabbergasted. Anyhow, so that's it. De minimis use, de minimis. Is that fair use, or is that even an exception to fair use? As in, I don't even need to enter fair use.
It's different. It's different. You could think of it policy-wise as a subspecies of fair use, but really it's just that the point of copyright protection is someone else not stealing somebody else's invention or creation for their profit. And all the exceptions are around when that's not what's happening. And that's not what was happening here.
And someone had said, Viva's a family man. He's not going to go down and get arrested. I'm not going to go down and get arrested. But I'm going to try to get down tomorrow. And when I say I'm a family man, if my wife doesn't kill me, I'm going to go down tomorrow, because it's like I leave and then I leave 3 kids, 2 dogs, the 2 special needs dogs. For anybody who doesn't know, Winston is blind or very close to blind, and Pudge, the paralyzed puggle, is very paralyzed in the back legs. And, it's a handful when I go even for an entire day. But at some point I might have to. So we'll see what happens. Okay. So
speaking of big tech, the continued effort to deplatform Joe Rogan, I think, will inevitably backfire on everybody doing it, because there's increasingly aggressive efforts. I believe these are Wall Street connected entities, hedge funds that have interest in big pharma stocks, that have bought up a lot of royalties from the rights to a lot of licenses to a lot of music and are leveraging it. That's part of it. But clearly it's a collective effort too. I mean, Biden is out there saying, please stop people from saying bad stuff about me. just relabeling it misinformation as if that would magically cure all of his political problems when he can't even execute, a simple foreign military operation without blowing up a bunch of women and children again, as he did in Afghanistan, did it again this past week, going after an ISIS guy, and he then misrepresented what took place, of course, while he's busy trying to figure out a way to maybe have a war in Europe, because that's always a good way to solve problems. While his son, apparently the criminal investigation of his son continues to deepen, and whoever's handling that aspect. But in all of that, they're obsessed with going after Rogan. So their latest effort was to take a bunch of clips out of context of Rogan repeating the N-word, but doing so clearly not in a racist manner whatsoever. And they're just, and in fact, people did a nice, funny version of showing how many times the Young Turks has done the exact same thing, and sometimes for less than plausible explanations. And so he issued another apology. I don't know if the apology tour is the most effective political path here, but there's clearly increasing pressure on Spotify from, I think what they're most worried about is not musicians pulling licenses. They're mostly worried about Wall Street entities shorting their stock and driving it down. So if they now you have Barack Obama now joining and being participant in all of this as well, by threatening to remove things from Spotify. So it's clearly politically escalating. And I think the ultimate outcome, if Rogan plays his cards right, is that he gets to walk away from Spotify, probably even get a payment from Spotify. Spotify removed another 70 plus, it seems like random, but they must have imposed a filter on a bunch of his old archived episodes, including several with Michael Malice as an example. And then on top of that, there appears to be escalation. The best thing for Rogan would be to walk away from Spotify, use this as a breach of contract opportunity, maybe get them to pay him some cash as an exit, and go over to someplace like Rumble that can pay him more money, and he can get complete freedom. And that will all the people doing this will be shocked, because what that will do is ultimately empower and enrich free tech. Not only give Rogan much more freedom to talk about whatever he wants, rather than misinformation labels and random censorship of his episodes, and they can attack him all they want. Rumble won't care, and at the same time awaken the rest of the world to Rumble's existence. So it would just promote free tech. It'd be good for Rogan, good for Rumble, good for free tech, bad for the censors, bad for Spotify. I think that is the best outcome if Rogan plays his cards right. If he stays on the apology and bend the knee tour, then he's going to just undermine his own brand and hurt himself financially.
And that's the problem. It's like, look, I'm not going to poo-poo on Robert Kennedy, but when he apologized, and there's no but, when he apologized for his Anne Frank analogy, I said, first of all, you meant it when you said it. It's not necessary. You may find it offensive and whatever, but you meant it. So you apologizing for something you did on purpose that you meant when you did at the time, you're not going to gain any sympathy from your enemies, and you might lose goodwill with your allies or your supporters. And I haven't seen Joe Rogan's second apology. The first one where he said, what I'll do to be better on Spotify. Fine. I saw a little tongue in cheek in that. Like, I'm going to bring more people on to really push it home. But no, the idea of apologizing, when you are apologizing to people who are not interested in forgiveness, you do it for one and only one reason: if you genuinely believe you did something wrong. So yeah, I agree with you, Robert. I mean, he's gonna never gain any sympathy with the media that wants him metaphorically dead, and he might just lose support from the people who have been supporting him through thick and thin because of who he is. And I had to retweet Mike Cernovich's tweet, because this is the issue. The issue is not having standards and applying them mercilessly. It's not having standards and applying them selectively. Howard Stern on Sirius, he brings in whatever he brings in for, is it Sirius? It's Sirius. He's got some very bad video of him, with darker skin than Justin Trudeau, let's just say, using words that Joe Rogan is using. And so what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Do it to everyone or don't do it to anyone. And I will be of the opinion to not do it to anyone. If you don't like it, don't follow them. I've stopped listening to Howard Stern. But Howard Stern, I guess for all of his foibles, doesn't apologize. But so he gets out of his contract. He says, okay, this is sort of a constructive dismissal, or you're fabricating a default to try to get me out. Buy me out and I'll leave. And then he does what? Signs on with Rumble and a company that's willing to pay him to speak his mind.
Yeah, willing to pay him more than Spotify pays him. So, and what Rogan proved already with Spotify is that he could go exclusive to a platform that did not have a podcast history in the case of Spotify of any substance. They were just a music streaming service. It's what makes him vulnerable in part here. And his audience would follow. So that means the advertisers that advertise with him, who are not going to be concerned, if you look at most of Rogan's advertisers, they're not going to be concerned at all about this controversy. They will follow him to Rogan. I mean, they'll follow him to Rumble. And so he gets, Rumble will pay him more than Spotify is paying him. He gets complete freedom, carte blanche, no more censorship, none of that. He protects his brand as the free speech, independent, alternative platforming brand. And and he makes a lot more money, and his advertisers will stick with him. So, the smart money move, the smart freedom move, the smart branding move is to move to Rumble. And then, of course, that would promote Rumble tremendously, which will, allow people to see a lot of how an independent platform operates, a platform that's not politically manipulating you every 2 seconds, like YouTube is, like Spotify is, in other contexts. And so I think it would just be a win-win-win for Rogan. And well, I won't go into detail. Let's just say that's a thought that's in his head.
All right. And now I want to bring this up because Marion Hummel said, never apologize. You said it, own it. I said, never apologize if you don't think you did something wrong. I mean,
Roy Cohn would tell you differently, as Donald Trump learned. Never apologize, always attack.
Well, okay. So that's not my philosophy of life. I will apologize to the individual who I think I've wronged if I did something that was misinterpreted or that I actually think was wrong, as I've done, but I'll apologize privately. I once got into a Twitter fight with someone who seemed genuinely insulted, and I had to privately DM them to apologize, to say, I didn't mean that, if that's what you took. But these public apologies, you're not apologizing to the people to whom the wrong has allegedly or purportedly been done. So why would they forgive you? And the other thing is apologizing for something you did on purpose, that you meant at the time you did it, and that you didn't think was wrong at the time. Yeah. And the apology, I'm sorry for how you perceive that. That rubs me the wrong way. So I'm going to go see Joe Rogan's apology. I will be forgiving on Joe because I think he's trying to be understanding. But one thing I've discovered now is you trying to be understanding with people who are not trying to be understanding doesn't go far. It took me 2 years to realize that, people. And Robert, I mean, I guess speaking of trying to be understanding with people who don't want to be understanding, we can get into the January 6th commission and the persecution, or I meant to say prosecution or persecution of Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, for anybody who doesn't know, I was first exposed to him with the Build the Wall indictment, where because of my own lived experience as a lawyer, I'm skeptical of people drawing funds from charities in general. I'm not going to backtrack on what I said at the time when I first analyzed that, but I've seen now that Steve Bannon he might be more of a not legitimate target, but a rather political target that they're never going to let up on. After the Build the Wall, the pardon, they're going after him again for defying the congressional subpoenas to sit down. They just want to sit down and talk about January 6th, because now it's gone from a legislative inquiry to destroy your political adversary, Banana Republic. And he said, I'm not complying with your subpoena. I've got executive privilege. Come at me if you think I don't. And instead of litigating the executive privilege, they just go after contempt of Congress or contempt of subpoena. What's been the latest? Because I didn't hear about the spying stuff. I read the motion that he made a motion to compel discovery, because apparently they're not turning over potentially exculpatory or at the very least relevant information in their prosecution of him for contempt of Congress. But I read it very quickly and didn't appreciate that he has, apparently it's known that he's been spied on by the government.
Yeah, so I mean, what you have, the January 6th committee is getting so out of hand at converting legislative investigation into prosecutorial interrogation and inquisition that even the New York Times had a piece saying this is extraordinary and this is unusual. and quoting Democratic lawyers who are representing people saying this is way past the pale and this is a bad idea and the precedent's being set is itself unprecedented. And materials related to January 6th we'll get into later. Pelosi's trying to hide on grounds of sovereign immunity, which makes you wonder what this committee is really up to. So the background for the motion to compel discovery is that in the federal criminal process, you have a statutory right under the rules, but on top of that, you have a constitutional right under two main decisions, Brady and Giglio, which established by the U.S. Supreme Court that the government has to turn over any documents that are relevant to preparing your defense or that are helpful to your defense. And they have to be generous in that regard and can't be limited. Well, they found out by another motion they filed that the January 6th committee subpoenas Steve Bannon. Trump's lawyer advises Bannon that there's executive privilege and ask him to assert executive privilege until that can get resolved in the courts. Bannon's lawyer communicates that to the January 6th committee. The response of the Justice Department in all of this was to get subpoenas somehow, which should not have ever been obtained, to get the emails and private communications of the lawyer between the lawyer and Steve Bannon. And so that by itself is completely shocking. That's a total violation of Sixth Amendment rights, probably a violation of Fifth Amendment due process rights. But rather than disclose what they seized or what you could say they stole, they have just hid it. And it's not the only thing they're hiding. The other point of the motion was to highlight how unusual this whole prosecution is. That normally when a lawyer is the one saying he's not going to answer for these legal reasons until the court resolves it, you don't prosecute the individual. That's part one. Part two, almost nobody gets prosecuted for contempt of Congress. It's just a very rare prosecution.
If I may stop there. When was the last time any prominent political figure had been prosecuted for contempt of Congress? Because I know Eric Holder was deemed to be in contempt of Congress. Did they prosecute him?
Oh, no, they didn't prosecute. I mean, Lois Lerner, head of the IRS, was in clear contempt of Congress, never prosecuted. I don't think, to my knowledge, no. I mean, Clapper lied to Congress, never prosecuted. There were repeated by the Obama administration refusals to cooperate with congressional investigations completely, often without any legal excuse, and none of them were prosecuted. And that's the point that they point out. One of the things they want is what the Justice Department did to make sure this was not a politically tainted prosecution, given that the committee said from the get-go they wanted to prosecute Bannon. Pelosi said she wanted to prosecute Bannon from the beginning, and the president said he wanted to prosecute Bannon from the beginning.
And Merrick Garland apparently was under tremendous political pressure. Former Supreme Court, he wasn't a nominee officially, was he? He was officially a nominee?
Obama nominated him.
Never had his hearing. Merrick Garland under tremendous political pressure, and he satisfied that pressure by actually indicting Bannon.
But they want to hide all the documents about any communications concerning that, any conversations concerning that. They're hiding everything. The prosecution is hiding everything, not turning over anything. So those are the two big glaring issues. How much did they violate attorney-client privilege? How much was this a politically tainted prosecution, given how unusual and peculiar it is? And then the third part is whether they lied to the grand jury. It appears the FBI agent involved in the prosecution lied to the grand jury about facts and evidence relevant to the case. And it appears that the U.S. Department of Justice attorneys for the District of Columbia may have lied to the grand jury about what the law is. And those are two things you can't do. Because of an old bad Supreme Court case, there's a lot of grand jury stuff they get away with now. But what the two things that you still can't do is you can't lie to them, and you can't, by commission or omission, and you can't misinstruct them on the law. So they wanted to see what that is, and yet the prosecution refuses to turn that over, refuses to show whether any of the evidence concerning what was said to the grand jury about the law, what was said to the grand jury about key critical facts that were exculpatory facts, and whether or not they lied to them. And they have evidence already by inference that they did. So you've got lying to the grand jury, misinstructing the grand jury, stealing and seizing attorney-client privilege communications, and a politically tainted, contaminated process, which they're hiding in discovery. It's about, all of the abuses of the criminal justice process you can imagine, all for a misdemeanor contempt case that is almost never ever brought.
It's nuts. And but I just want to say one thing. I went over to Rumble rants. Alyosha $50 back pay, she says, or he, and 491 says, "Do you read the Rumble rants?" I do, not as often as I should, but it's just because they don't come through StreamYard with the comments on YouTube. But Robert, I mean, this is we've had this discussion in Whitmer in Jan 6. How does the prosecution not have? I mean, they do have the affirmative obligation to hand over everything and anything that might be relevant to the defense, not just exculpatory but relevant. So, how do they even get out of that obligation in the first place? And what are the chances getting in front of a judge in this is in DC?
Yeah. So it's all going to depend on, his judge. And because there's some real bad ones in the District of Columbia. Because the other thing he's asking for is he's saying, given this came from a referral in which potential witnesses include members of that committee, he wants certain files of that committee. He wants some of the communications and files the January 6th committee has. And the Justice Department this is an old pretext that they have long lost on legally. They say, oh, we're just the prosecutor's office. We don't have the Congress members' files. We don't have the president's files. We don't have that part of the government's files. Yes, you do legally. And the courts have consistently ruled that you have to turn over anything that you have access to, particularly any other agency of the federal government. This can include, in fact, state government in certain circumstances. So they're just refusing to even they're playing a game of, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil by not discovering information that could be hurtful to their cause or case, but that's not their legal entitlement. So so Bannon is fighting back effectively, and we'll see if the court upholds the law, then this is a case that should ultimately be dismissed substantively for First and Fifth and Sixth Amendment violations.
Dismissed substantively though before trial or on
verdict? Yeah, dismissed with prejudice for government misconduct, violations of the First Amendment right of free speech, Fifth Amendment right of due process, right to discovery, Sixth Amendment right to counsel. All of it's applicable. But at a minimum, they should turn over these documents and information. So we'll see whether you can get a fair trial in the District of Columbia by how this judge acts, because in most cases, well, legally, I'll put it this way, he's entitled to what he's seeking.
Now, I want to bring this one up. 19,000 views between YouTube and Rumble is amazing. Now, I want to see this. Viva, you need to show the Portland Andy stream. Now, I'm not showing it because I haven't looked it up. The two people who are currently live streaming in Ottawa, and go watch, Ottawalks, Ottawalks, and Portland Andy, but I don't know who Portland Andy is as well. So at the risk of endorsing something that I don't know if I should be endorsing, apparently these are the individuals live streaming right now. So if anybody wants to see what's going on in Ottawa,
based on her avatar, I would do whatever she said.
Well, Robert, that part of my brain has shut off a long time ago. I'll tell you that much. So Steve Bannon as a human. I only got to meet him for the first time. I think it was Friday when I was on the show, and then Saturday again, but digitally. How does he internalize this stress? Does it phase him at all?
He's not stressed at all. I think his father just passed away. I think, if I recall correctly, I know a relative did. That would stress him out. This kind of stuff, he welcomes this kind of stuff. He was born for this kind of stuff. So, and that's why picking on Bannon is, I get why they think it's politically beneficial to them. It's not strategically savvy. The Justice Department should have thought twice.
And this might be my own projection. I don't know how I would react during such stress because I've never, I know once upon a time, a lawyer anecdote, I had a client who liked me a little too much and didn't want me to stop representing them. And I know how I reacted to that at the time. And suffice to say,
I had a case like that. And I said, every time I imitated the Godfathers, like every time I try to get out, they pull me back in.
Oh, I was subpoenaed to be a witness at a hearing on a motion I drafted. So that's how bizarre it got. Suffice to say, I lost 7 pounds in 2 weeks, and I was carrying on pepper spray for a while. But we live and we learn. So I don't know. Maybe I would deal with that stress better than I think I would. But yeah, this is governmental, systemic. It's over the top. Phil, I didn't even read this. Phil Buckley says, MAJ Phil Buckley. Philip Buckler. Masking orders immoral and unlawful, even in military. Refusing orders to wear a mask in uniform statements. Winning on masks in the Army means winning on masks and vaccines everywhere else. Please help. Watch and share on Rumble. Real Mass Science. Not an endorsement. I'm reading the chat. Philip, thank you very much.
Well, that's a good transition to the mask and vaccine cases we had this past week. Speaking of the military, the big case that's pending in Florida, which is brought as a class action to represent everybody, moved to intervene for an emergency injunction because 2 of the members of the class were being imminently threatened with adverse action for asserting religious exceptions to the vaccine mandate. It is very apparent that Biden's military hierarchy is denying en masse everybody's religious accommodations request. Navy SEALs have already won in a federal court case in Texas, but that was a much smaller subclass. This is a class intended to represent everybody. And what the federal court not only granted the injunction in the case, but the language he utilized made very clear where he's heading. He's heading to granting an injunction across the board against the military vaccine mandate for denial of religious accommodations. His language was harsh. His language was aggressive. I put the case up at our board at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, where you can read the actual case, the opinion itself. But I think that case means the military mandate denial of religious accommodations is going to be enjoined by that federal court. He only granted a temporary injunction, but the language, and because that was all that was requested, but with the language he used, parallels language he used earlier in the case, which strongly suggested that if they did mass denials, he was going to enjoin them and find they violated the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, which is the reason why the religious rights are more robust against the federal government than they are in other cases or contexts for the most part, because it's automatic that they have to meet strict scrutiny. It's not there's no alternative. They can't pretend it's intermediate scrutiny or rational basis or anything else they pretend. They have to show that it is a narrowly tailored, that the mandate is a narrowly tailored means to a compelling public interest. They can't. The court made note of the fact of how little evidence the government's been able to present to support anything like that. And so that means I think the military mandate is only a matter of time before it is DOA in federal court.
And DOA strictly because they're not respecting reasonable accommodations. Had they done that, had they respected religious exemptions, medical exemptions, immunity, if we don't get into the science, then it would be fine, correct? I mean, presumably they'd have a more uphill battle.
They're not challenging the power of the military to mandate a vaccine because that ship, unfortunately, has sailed many years ago. But because the carte blanche kind of control they have over soldiers. But they are recognized. But there's the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act was a critical law because it protected everybody, including members of the military. And I get that, Navy, I think sailors, the Marines, people get on me for saying they're not all soldiers. That's just the Army. You got to get Marines right, sailors right. So the airmen right. I think I got them all right. But it protects all of them from a denial of religious accommodations. And that's where I think the military is going to lose ultimately. And that will set a critical precedent because that'll be the first major precedent that the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act restricts the military, other than the Navy SEAL case out of Texas, and this one will be bigger because it's on a class action basis meant to reach everybody. And I think ultimately they should fail on that. Now, I think their military mandate should fail because they only said that a biologic licensed drug could be used to get around the anthrax case problem. And all the courts are pretending that the courts are recognizing that that's not available. Sometimes the military is lying and mislabeling it. But they are not taking action on that side, which I think they should, because based on the anthrax case, you can't do emergency use authorized mandates in the military outside of limited circumstances that have not been met here. And so I think the court should have embraced that. They have not. That argument, some people want to know whether the argument had been raised. Yes, it has, particularly in the Florida case and some other cases on behalf of the military. But I think ultimately the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act will come to the rescue of any of those military members who asserted religious accommodations and will establish strong legal claims moving forward for them. So I think and will provide meaningful protection going forward, not only for this, once this court issues its decision, probably later this month.
All right, now I'm going to get to the, well, can prisoners be forced to take the vaccine? I presume nobody can in theory, Robert, but can they be
Oh yeah,
offered?
there's some legal cases on that. There's also arguments pending about compassionate release based on the issue of COVID-19 and the vaccine. So that's in fact the most common federal court dispute right now is compassionate release disputes about COVID-19 and the vaccine.
Now I'm just going to say this. I'm
On
watching
the healthcare workers, a bunch of states are going to be filing suit to try to continue to challenge the mandate. But remember the mandate for healthcare workers, the Supreme Court said one reason why it was okay is because there were medical accommodations and religious accommodations that, quote, had to be granted. So that the religious accommodate, the Supreme Court has never said they can do a mandate without religious accommodations yet, and nor will they.
now, just say I'm watching. I checked out Portland Andy. Apparently, he has multiple screens of live shots from different locations. I heard some French, so maybe he's also in Quebec City. Ottawa is now streaming, and we're watching in real time, but only from the perspective of where Ottawa currently is. So, I'm bringing up comments. I don't know if they're true. I don't know if they're not true. But look, it seems that things are going to come to a head tonight. Yes, Robert.
Oh yeah.
What were you? I had one. Okay, never mind. You go for it.
So the other big mandate issues that came up are on the mask mandate side in schools. 2 cases came down. Virginia apparently said that the governor can't require schools to be able to opt out, parents to be able to opt out of the mask mandates. But that was a temporary ruling. We'll see where it goes as it goes up the food chain in Virginia. The bigger ruling was in Illinois, where a court said the schools could not mandate the vaccine. Mandate the mask or exclude people for testing. So it said not only could you not do a mask mandate, you couldn't do a testing mandate, and you couldn't exclude kids or parents, period. And the reasoning was an argument that was partially discussed in my debate with Alan Dershowitz back last year, around this time, actually, I think, or close to it, which was, in my view, we have a whole history of public health law in America that deals with this precise issue of public health risk of an individual and what the state can do to limit public health risk. And that's the quarantine laws. And then what do the quarantine laws require? And there's even constitutional cases on this. The quarantine laws require clear and convincing evidence that an individual is in imminent risk of causing severe harm from a transmissible disease for which your remedy is a narrowly tailored remedy to solve that precise problem, which you can only decide after the legislature passes the quarantine law, the executive branch enforces it, and there's a due process hearing allowed where you're able to contest it. And his point, the judge's point, based on very smart litigation brought, was that these testing mandates and these masking mandates fit within the definition in Illinois, and I think everywhere, of quarantine law. And because they didn't comply with quarantine law, because the legislature didn't pass these restrictions, because there was no due process afforded, because there is no imminent risk of severe harm when there are alternatives available, because of that, it couldn't be legal what was being done by the governor and by the state executive branch. And on top of that, he mentioned separation of powers requires this go through the legislative, judicial, and executive branches combined and could not be done in the circumvented way they were doing, which Dershowitz himself acknowledged is the correct constitutional approach. He agreed that the only constitutional vaccine mandate would be one where you have, he kind of folded on the clear and convincing evidence. He tried to back out of it early, then folded. Once I brought up the Connie Buck case, and he realized that he doesn't want to be associated with that. But he agreed that legislature needs to be involved, judicial branch needs to be involved, executive branch, all three need to be involved. There need to be the availability of hearings to contest it and challenge it, so forth. And I think that's what's missing from all of these, from the lockdowns, from the mask mandates, from the vaccine mandates. They didn't go through the legislative process hardly ever. They didn't go through a judicial process hardly ever. And they skipped every element of due process and the legal standard that should be applicable and appropriate in this circumstance. So a really good ruling out of Illinois. Now, they're going to try to run up the flagpole, and Chicago saying they're going to ignore it, and there's all of that. So it'll continue to be litigated throughout the state. But the logic of and the legal basis of the court's ruling are really unimpeachable in my view.
And now, I mean, this is something of a good segue into the Canadian stuff. We got 2 big cases coming in Canada. And to the answer of the question, someone said, are you going to talk about Canadian stuff? It was in French. And I said, oui, nous allons commencer de parler de ça bientôt. it's a good segue into what's going on in Canada, because I mentioned early in the intro, Brian Peckford, who apparently is the last living signatory of the 1982 Constitution, which provided Canadians with our constitutional rights as protected by the Charter, with a big but or a big asterisk, which is the first section, which says these are your rights, your fundamental rights and freedoms, and can only be infringed in accordance with, what can be justified in a free and democratic society, in accordance with, legitimate laws passed. Brian Peckford has sued the federal government for what is now the travel restrictions on the unvaccinated within Canada of Canadians. And people gave me a hard time for flying to Florida because you need to show your vaccination status. If I had not been double vaccinated, I just wouldn't have gone. But foreign governments are one thing. They set their own laws. Canadian law, applying to its own citizens, has to abide by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which says you have charter rights. They're by and large the same as in the Constitution, just not respected as much. Mobility, interprovincial travel, freedom from unlawful detainment, et cetera, et cetera. In Canada now, you cannot travel on train or plane internally within provinces if you're not fully vaccinated and you're 13 and over, unless I'm mistaken. Brian Peckford, who actually drafted the charter, is suing the government. And this is what I say. He's suing the government on the basis that these are clear charter violations. And there's always been the argument that they were never passed through legislative process to begin with. So you're not even talking about measures that were implemented by law, which went through what Robert talks about, the debate process, the standard legislative process. These have been edicts, diktats, one after the other for 2 years under emergency, which has lasted 2 years. He's suing. It's an obvious suit. The only question is you got to get to a hearing on the merits, which we haven't really gotten to on any of these constitutional challenges. But if anyone's going to bring a suit and maintain integrity in front of the court, it's going to be a plaintiff like Brian Peckford, and not a plaintiff like Viva Fry. So my take is these were always unconstitutional from the get-go. Even if they had been passed through standard legislative process, they weren't even done that way. They were jammed down through emergency orders, renewed unlawfully for 2+ years now. And that's the way it should go. And that's all we're going to see on that. Maybe one day we'll get Peckford on for a sidebar, Robert. But you sent me the link, and I had heard about it because my dad sent it to me yesterday. New Brunswick, a father denied not visitation rights, custodial rights, because he's not vaccinated, refuses to get vaccinated, and his child is immunocompromised. And this is the latest tool in family lawfare. The mother says, I don't want the father seeing the kid or even having anything to do with the kid. Kid's immunocompromised. Dad won't get vaccinated. And I also want to authorize vaccination of the child, notwithstanding parental opposition, father opposition. And a judge out of New Brunswick said the kid can get vaccinated with the mother's consent despite the father's opposition. But that part I can understand in law. But the father loses visitation rights because of the Omicron variant. And he poses a risk to the kid. I mean, Robert, it's more of the same, but I mean, what are these lawsuits looking like in the United States? Has there been any progress on these similar lawsuits, which we've seen out of New York, Chicago, and the States? Is this the trend in the United States as well?
In the States, at least, there are constitutional limitations on what a court can do vis-a-vis a parent's fundamental right, constitutionally protected fundamental right to raise their children as they see fit and to be a parent of the child. So termination proceedings of any parental rights are very, very difficult to obtain justifiably because we want parents, not the state, dictating parent-child relationships. And so here you would have to prove clear and convincing evidence that the parent presents an imminent risk of severe harm to even limit the parent's interaction with the child. And you'd have to show more in order to show any right of termination. And I mean, the problem here is what you have is a lot of judges just assuming things that are just not factual, just like that Florida federal judge did. The reality is children are at very low risk from COVID. Even the new data came out reported by Justin Hart at Rational Ground that would contest I'll put it this way, since we're on YouTube, that would contest the assumption that the immunocompromised are at great risk from COVID-19 that are children. And so it still has a very unusual age profile, this virus, overwhelmingly people that are very old with comorbidities. It just kids, for whatever reason, are more immune from COVID-19 than they are from the flu, according to Justin Hart and some of this data. And what is, you have these family courts just making assumptions, like state and federal courts are doing across the globe, across the United States. Now, there were some good rulings that came out of Austria and Germany where courts are demanding this information, because whenever a court has demanded a meaningful evidentiary hearing or trial on any of these issues, lockdowns, masks, vaccine mandates, etc., the people pushing the mandates and the lockdowns have almost universally lost because their evidence is crap. This is why judges make up facts, pretend they know facts, or refuse to allow evidentiary hearings rather when they want to impose or enforce or justify these governmental interventions. So that's what it would be in the States. It'd be much harder to pull that off in the States. Well, now, there's additional suits in the States related to this. There was a kid who got a COVID-19 shot who wasn't supposed to at a CVS. So they're suing, and the question will be, can they get around? How broad is COVID? Is this immunity? Is this immunity so broad that when they screw up and give someone who wasn't even supposed to get the shot, can they still be held liable? There's some law out there that suggests they can't be, but at least they're going to challenge it and contest it with this kid who's suing. And the states are bringing suit against on behalf of the National Guard, Texas and Alaska, pointing out that the National Guard is the state National Guard unless the federal government has commissioned it in a specific way, which it hasn't for the purposes of imposing this vaccine mandate. So it's a more robust challenge than the Oklahoma challenge. So we'll see what happens. That's a federal case pending in Texas. And then in addition, a COVID testing company, you sort of hinted at this from your experience in Miami, a COVID testing company has now been sued in the States for faking data results and test results in mass. No real shock for people that have been tracking this in some detail or people that have experienced aspects of this. So that will be an important suit moving forward. And the British Medical Journal is looking at filing a libel suit against Facebook in the United Kingdom on behalf of a story that concerns my client, Brooke Jackson, who was the whistleblower who disclosed and exposed the problems with Pfizer's clinical trials. And Facebook basically lied about the article in order to suppress the article being shared and linked. And this is, again, the British Medical Journal, one of the most well-respected medical publications in the world. And they are sufficiently agitated enough about what social media tried to do to suppress this article. Because this article was much bigger in Europe and around the world than it was in the States because institutional media and social media suppressed it. And so Facebook may be facing a libel suit in the UK concerning their efforts to try to suppress the truth of the story that Brooke Jackson brought to the world.
I had a thought there for a second, which had to do with, I lost my thought, Robert. I'll get it back in a second, but I want to just say one thing to, no, that wasn't it. Someone who said, is this going to be Canada's Tiananmen Square? I don't think if it is, it's going to rhyme and it's not going to repeat. There's going to be a tragedy, someone freezing to death if that's what happens, and it's going to be terrible and it's going to be predictable. So
my understanding is the Canadian military has already said they're not getting involved, period.
Well, but then I'm just hoping that it's not going to be, there's not going to be an unnecessary tragedy because of idiocy. But three things, I always overestimate man's ability to not descend into idiocy. But there was another one. I'll get my thought back. I had one thought before that, but hold on. It was one chat which said, Viva, did the hippie bus from DC show up in Ottawa yet? They will be American FBI and CMP aboard the bus. Robert, I guess that was the segue that I was looking for. Oh, I'm sorry. No, before the segue, that was my thought. All of these cases, Robert, in Canada and the ones we've seen in the States where they deprive a father or a parent, because it happened to a mother in Chicago as well. This is not gender specific. They've always been on the injunction, the emergency orders, where you have a hearing to determine emergency court orders and then argue it out on the merits. So they have no evidence because by and large, they have not submitted any medical evidence. But, even the cases coming out of Canada, they're on the injunction bases, and they haven't gotten to the hearing on the merits yet. And that's the big pickle in all of this, is that on the injunctive bases, you have to satisfy certain criteria that you do not need to satisfy on the hearing on the merits of a permanent injunction. We just haven't gotten there yet. So these laws, someone said the notwithstanding clause, which is in the Constitution, that says a province can enact a law that specifically violates certain charter rights if it specifically provides for it in the law. The problem is we're not even there, because we're not dealing with laws that were passed through the legislative process. We're dealing with these edicts and diktats, which we're not. So you don't even get into the notwithstanding clause, and it's arguable whether or not you even get into the first article charter exemption, which is in a free and democratic society, laws that were passed, because they weren't passed. So, but the problem is we're on the injunctive basis, we're on the provisionals, we're on the at the stage where you need to prove emergency, irreparable harm, color of right. What's the other one? Oh gosh darn it, I forgot. The criteria for injunctions on a provisional or interlocutory basis, and we're not there yet. So that's the issue. On the merits, it's a no-brainer, but you got to get to the merits, and it takes time and money to get there. But Robert, have we seen the hippie bus out of Ottawa? Which brings us into January 6th. For anybody who doesn't know, the day before January 6th, there was a hippie bus which said stop the steal and a bunch of other stuff that was pulled over for alleged weapons violations, possession of weapons violations. And if you've never heard of this, it's true, and you might want to ask yourself why you've never heard of this. The latest out of January 6th is that who filed the FOIA request? It was Judicial Watch, right? So
yes,
Judicial Watch doing God's work yet again, asking for FOIA requests, or it was common law request to information of public domain. And Robert, you got to explain the distinction to the crowd. What's going on?
So the Judicial Watch used a right that has always existed, but people tend to forget about, which is a common law right of access to documents that are public documents, should be public documents, or concern major matters of public policy concerning any governmental actor, period. And so the Capitol Police and Congress is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. And they have relied upon that to be beyond responsibility or accountability for what they are doing or what information they possess. Judicial Watch recognized that for several decades, it has been recognized. The same reason why we have a right of public access to the courts is rooted in a common, well, that's constitutionally rooted. The common law right of access has a constitutional origin of a kind, but it's recognized through the federal common law that you have a right to any document that is a public document that should not be kept secret, that doesn't meet certain legal standards, that concerns any important public issue. And that's beyond the Freedom of Information Act, outside of the Freedom of Information Act. So Judicial Watch sagely used that. Tom Fitton, the current operator of Judicial Watch, a fan of the show, by the way, highlighted 3 items. And the 3 items were things we talked about all the way back at the time, or that you could have seen at a first ever hush hush at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, which was 3 unusual things about January 6th. 1, why was there such low security? So they requested all the emails concerning any communications or conversations that were had about security and January 6th between Nancy Pelosi or the House leadership and the Capitol Police and anyone else. So they want what conversations took place. So that's category 1, emails and documents that get to that. And the category 2 also kind of relates back to that, but captures different areas where those documents might be stored. Category 3 was they want the videotapes. They're like, let's look at the videotapes, those 14,000 hours. Now, a lot of those 14,000 hours are taken by other people that the Justice Department has. They're requesting what the Capitol has. Give us the videotapes of what happened that day. And the U.S. Capitol Police refused to give any of it. And Nancy Pelosi's argument is, we're sovereign. We're immune. We have sovereign immunity from any of these claims. The problem is the law is clear. No, she doesn't. She does not have sovereign immunity from a common law right of access to those documents. That's already been adjudicated in other cases in the past. So a Judicial Watch is going right for the core documents of why was security so low that day, and why and what actually happened. I mean, for example, it's come out now that some of the doors that were opened had to have been opened by someone from the inside because of the electronic way those doors are secured. They could not have been opened and pushed open from people on the outside. Had to be done from the inside. So that means there was inside. How did that happen? There's video footage of it somewhere. There's video footage of everything else that happened. And the big question is, why was there a big lapse in security? What did the Capitol Police actually do that day? Did they, like a lot of people on the ground said, things got out of hand after they were attacked by Capitol Police, not before then. Is that what happened? Is that why the Justice Department is hiding all of these videotapes? Why is Nancy Pelosi hiding all these videotapes? Why isn't it part of the January 6th committee? So Judicial Watch is going for it. Federal suit pending. Depending on the judge, of course, in the District of Columbia, they should win. And then we would finally get the two big pieces of evidence. What happened with communications about security leading up to that day? And what happened with security that day? And what does the footage actually show?
Someone says, Viva, is it lawful for police to arrest people bringing supplies to truckers? Once you declare a state of emergency, everything is lawful. I mean, everything
exactly. I mean, they figured out, what do we do? What do we do? Oh, how have we dealt with this the last 2 years? We just say emergency and bye-bye rights, bye-bye law.
And bear in mind, people, they've declared a state of emergency in light or despite of the last week of documentation in real time. Imagine they declare a state of emergency there because people are honking their horns, and allegedly, according to some, there's noise of 85 decibels inside people's apartments, which I'm suspicious of, but I'll take for granted. Declare a state of emergency, you have no rights anymore. And that brought us to another question, which was, it's the chat's gone. But Robert, okay, so hold on, because this is my question. I'm reading the motion, and I love, first of all, good law drafting is like art. You know it's good when you see it. So reading the Judicial Watch motion, you have your freedom of access, freedom of information, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, which allows you to ask for information from certain entities. Why on earth are the DC police exempt from FOIA? First question.
Just by Congress thought about it, and they thought, we're going to exempt ourselves from this.
Okay, so everyone should appreciate this. FOIA, there are only a few states that are exempt from FOIA requests. I believe Michigan is one of them, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, what is on a state level, you have your own analog state laws. Usually sometimes they're called sunshine laws. Sometimes they're called Open Records Act. Sometimes they use the same language as Freedom of Information Act, but they all have their own exceptions, derivations, limitations, and so forth. So that always varies by state. But there's a common law right of access that is underutilized. That's great to see Judicial Watch utilizing it for this context especially, but it's good for people to be more aware that they can use the common law right of access where there's a gap in FOIA.
So this is my question now, because they're going to say, okay, so certain states provide for specific FOIA request type permission. Others don't. And the question is going to be, if you had an underlying common law right to it in the first place, they're going to say, what was the purpose of allowing specific exemptions or allowances under law if you had the underlying allowance by common law in the first place? What good do those specific statutes do?
The statute was, if they wanted to, they could say the statute superseded and replaced the common law. But in almost all these instances, to my knowledge, they never have. So it became a supplemental way to obtain documents and information, and a formalized way to obtain documents and information, but didn't override or change the common law right of access. So, for example, with the FOIA doesn't apply in certain contexts to certain judicial actions, but the common law and constitutional right of access does. So I don't think they could actually use where the common law right of access is constitutionally rooted. They couldn't change it by statute. But what is it's more limited. The common law right of access, all they got to show is a credible, strong reason why the document should remain secret, and they win. So that standard's a little bit stricter in the FOIA context.
All right, I'm going to bring this up. This is just a decent observation. Barnes, 24 hours in a day, 14,000 hours of video footage. How many cameras in a 24-hour period? 583, which
that's what I'm saying. Some of the 14,000 hours, my understanding, comes from video footage the Justice Department collected from people that were there that day, on top of the surveillance that took place. But they got cameras all over the Capitol.
Well, that's what 583 is not that many cameras. I mean, in DC,
I'm sure they have more than they probably have more than that in the Capitol.
Yeah,
around
every
the Capitol.
every street corner, every office entrance.
Yeah, it came out publicly this week. Alex. So I'm not. Alex Jones said that he was worried about what could happen on January 6th because I'd laid out to him what was happening in the QAnon, and he interpreted as like, if you're right, that in January 6th is going to be a trap. And I remember, and I said, well, for two reasons, I don't think so. Trump people never really go crazy. That hasn't happened at any of these rallies, despite a lot of provocation. Even we're getting the crap kicked out of them in places in California, as an example. And secondly, I was like, the Capitol is the most secure building in the world. And on that day, it's going to be twice as secure. It's like, they got 2,500 police just for the Capitol. They're going to have in the National Guard were all over the city the night before. So I was like, there's no way there's going to be anything. And of course, there was a strange lapse of security and missing footage. How does that? It's like Jeffrey Epstein all over again. Eternal truth, folks. Epstein didn't kill himself.
And by the way, Nate Brody, who put out a video about this at the time, he documented it pretty well and talked about advanced knowledge that the FBI knew of and seemingly ignored. But so one thing about that motion, though, it also talked about public domain documents. So, what do they call it? National records. There was the issue that these are records that are public records that you cannot hide. So they are of sufficient interest or import that they are, what's the word? Not national archives, but they raised that argument, which I thought was very interesting as well. I mean, what's the argument and how does the government respond to it?
I mean, I think the government's in a difficult position. They really got to argue that these documents are secret documents. I think they're just buying time at this point, and they're hoping the judge is on their side, which they have a lot of them in D.C. Now, speaking of suits that don't have merit, that dimwit Vindman, the main witness against Trump that led to the first impeachment effort based on a phone call with Ukraine. Whereas they should release the transcript of Biden's conversation with Zelensky, because apparently by leaked stories, that was a truly insane conversation with Biden. But has brought suit against Donald Trump Jr. and a bunch of other people, claiming they were conspiring to violate and intimidate him from being a witness in violation of 42. The Ku Klux Klan Act is what it's colloquially named as, Section 1985, subsection 1 of Title 42 of the United States Code. The problem is simple. I don't see even the allegation that gives a plausible claim, aside from the fact that some of his claims are just false. He doesn't allege defamation or libel, though that's the implication, as Professor Jonathan Turley pointed out, and says, they're trying to disguise a defamation claim as a civil rights claim, probably because they can't meet the defamation standard, because all this is protected opinion. But the biggest problem is the misuse and abuse, which has happened throughout the Trump era, by law Twitter, the biggest group of incompetent rubes in law in the world, which was to misuse and abuse laws like sedition in the context of January 6th, but in this context, obstruction or witness intimidation or officer removal, because he alleges both. And the problem is all of those provisions require that you conspire with others to, by threat, intimidation, or force, remove someone from office, interfere with their action of their official duties, or intimidate them as a witness. And the problem is intimidation requires unlawful action. Because what a lot of these people on law Twitter and this other, Lawfare and these other places are trying to do is they're trying to criminalize people making public comments on a public trial and saying that's witness intimidation. That's obstruction of justice. And they allege this against Trump all the time. It's absurd. You have a constitutional right to defend yourself in the court of public opinion and to defend and to publicly comment on public proceedings, whether or not they're a trial or anything else. And that requires that intimidation can't be, I want this witness to testify differently. That doesn't reach the standard of intimidation. Intimidation is, if you don't testify this way, I'm going to burn down your house. That's it. Why? Because the underlying threat, the underlying effort of intimidation is an unlawful action. It has to be another unlawful action. It cannot be law. You can say whatever you want about a witness. Constitutionally, that's First Amendment protected. No statute can override that. So everything Donald Trump Jr. did was completely within his constitutional rights. Vindman has brought a patently frivolous claim that the Trump haters have vouched for and validated because lawfare is a joke. It is not a serious legal publication. It is a joke. It is a political hack. And they're trying to undermine people's beliefs that they can constitutionally comment on pending public proceedings. So they're the ones conspiring to intimidate people from asserting their civil rights and civil liberties, which includes the right to say Vindman is a lying, fraudulent piece of garbage, because he is.
Well, we anyone who saw Vindman in real time at the time could have come to that conclusion. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, Robert, I think
you should be if the courts in D.C. can be honorable, and that's still an open question based on the January 6 cases and the Steve Bannon cases. We'll see if they're honorable. That case will be dismissed with prejudice for the frivolous garbage that it is.
Now, with that said, Robert, you have not minced your words. Speaking of something that's going on, what is going on with Hunter Biden? I've been noticing a meme. Where is Hunter Biden? And now I'm thinking. You mentioned something earlier. What is going on with Hunter Biden at the current time?
Well, this has been my interpretation from day one, that the Justice Department will leave open and occasionally escalate the criminal investigation into Hunter Biden whenever they want to use it as leverage against his daddy, his papi, El Presidente, Joe Biden. That when they want him to comply with whatever it is they want, or if they want to ultimately leverage him out, they'll just use the criminal investigation of his son. Let it die down, then increase it. Let it die down. I don't believe they're doing a sincere, straightforward, honestly motivated criminal investigation of Hunter Biden. But what has come out is there's more grand jury subpoena activity concerning his activities in China that might have also been escalated because Peter Schweizer's book, Red Handed, details the scale of Hunter Biden's very legally questionable actions in China. So they might have felt obligated to say, see, we're really investigating this. We're not covering it up. Because this investigation has been pending purportedly since 2019. So they've never formally, fully wrapped it up. My view is they're leaving it open as a way to leverage the Papa Biden. Give him 10%, sometimes give him 50%, depending on the circumstances, as documented in the book, Red Handed by Peter Schweizer, which I recommend. So that's what's happening. It is clear he is still under criminal investigation. He has not been cleared. And I don't think he will, as long as the Justice Department wants leverage against Daddy.
It's crazy. And then once they decide that Biden is a liability and they have a political replacement, it will break. And then they will use it against Biden to root him out and get him out of office immediately with prejudice. Because it's crazy. Like, we heard a lot about Hunter Biden 2 years ago and haven't heard roughly anything since. Vindman,
just little bits leak out now and then that, hey, by the way, we're still here. Make sure Papa knows. Now, speaking of choices Papa's got to make, I believe and I've given out this pick at sportspicks.locals.com. On Predict It. Right now, the candidate I think most likely to be the next nominee is District Court Judge to the U.S. Supreme Court by President Biden, will be District Court Judge Michelle Childs from South Carolina. And there's one big reason for that. The secondary reason is Lindsey Graham has already made clear he will vote for her. So given that the United States Senator from New Mexico has had a stroke, coincidentally, not long after he got a certain shot, they need one Republican vote in order to, as long as Democrats hold place. And so with Lindsey Graham already saying he's basically going to vote for her, that gives strong motivation to pick her. The real reason is one of the most powerful men in the Democratic Party, Congressman Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, runs the biggest black political machine in South Carolina, helped put Obama over the top in 2008, and saved Joe Biden in 2020 after he had been whooped in Iowa, whooped in New Hampshire, and then whooped again in Nevada. it was South Carolina that salvaged and saved his career before Obama stepped in. And that was all thanks to Jim Clyburn. Clyburn wants Childs on the bench. There are rumors that that was his precondition of endorsing Biden in the first place. Lindsey Graham wants to stay in good stead with Jim Clyburn as well, even though he's on the opposite side of the aisle because it's South Carolina. So look for Judge Michelle Childs to be the next United States Supreme Court nominee, and she'll probably get elected, probably win the nomination and be on the court within a couple of months. Democrats will ultimately fold and capitulate to a neoliberal, corporate liberal black female nominee.
So that was my first question. I was Googling. I only presumed that Michelle Childs would be black because Biden promised it. Who are the other potential nominees that we know of?
Oh, there's several other. The leader is a nominee that's currently on the D.C. Court of Appeals. Childs had been nominated for the D.C. Court of Appeals, which, by the way, was another sign. Why is a judge from South Carolina being nominated for the D.C. Court of Appeals? It meant they wanted her up ready to go for the Supreme Court. The judge before her, who I've been in front of before when she was on the District Court of the District of Columbia, is the 2-1 favorite. But that's mostly because of her already being on the D.C. Court of Appeals, whereas Childs has just been nominated to it. What people don't understand is the power of Jim Clyburn over the president of the United States and the Democratic Party. It's the reason why Manchin and everybody else will fold. They're not going to get sideways with Jim Clyburn.
And of her, I mean, I'm looking at her history. She looks relatively young to be appointed by Barack Obama.
She'd be on the bench for a while. And maybe she'll be different. You know, I mean, she graduates from law school, and her first inspired idea was to join a corporate law firm and screw over other black and female employees who had been screwed over by their corporate employers. So gives you a sense of where her priorities have been. She also, by the way, allowed a private company to do a vaccine mandate in South Carolina, tried to allow crazy election reforms to go through that were overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. So she's been loyal on the key matters that this administration cares about.
And she's so, if there's a 2-1 favorite, what are her odds in terms of being
she's a 3-1 underdog. So that's what I've told people. I think that's a good bet to take. I would make her the 2-1 favorite.
Well, I don't know that I bet on these things, Robert, but I'm going to go check out my internet web sources. I don't even know that they offer this stuff in Canada. Someone says, Viva, is it true that most truckers in Canada are Sikh? I don't know that they're most Sikh. I know that I met one trucker from Kuwait who I think was Muslim. He wasn't Sikh. But there's a bunch. I mean, it's a diverse crowd. And now, Robert, the longer this goes on, the more I think I have to drive to Ottawa like first thing tomorrow morning to see what's going on. Okay, well, what else do we have on the? Let me get our list. There was one. Oh, the Airbnb. Okay, Robert. So you sent me the Airbnb lawsuit, which is Airbnb suing. I forget what city. It's San Francisco.
Yeah, it's the case that they lost, which is important for the Michelle Malkin case to come.
Okay, so the law, unless I've misunderstood something, that basically Airbnb sues the municipality. It was San Francisco, whatever city it was, because they passed an ordinance that Santa Monica, that basically said you cannot do short rentals because they don't want cities they don't want people turning houses into small hotels.
Yeah,
I can understand the rationale.
Another way to say the wealthy residents of Santa Monica don't want the commoners moving in next door, even temporarily.
Well, but no, I can understand the underlying rationale is that if people convert their residences into short-term hotels, it might facilitate the same problem we're having in Canada, which is foreign interests buy up the land and then can use it for commercial purposes. Fine. They pass an ordinance that says nothing shorter than 30-day rentals, which is interesting. I presume Santa Monica, West Coast is the same as West Coast Canada. Quebec, 30 days and longer, you get residential rights, which makes it very hard to operate commerces because right to retain occupancy, you can't get kicked out after 30 days, yada, yada. So they say you can't rent for shorter than that. And Airbnb is required to take certain information when people register online for the purposes of bookings. Airbnb then, they filed a motion. Who filed the motion to dismiss? It doesn't matter. Airbnb's argument at the end of the day was this violates my Section 230 immunity because you're compelling me to edit, alter, or otherwise, change online information posted by a third party. And I presume that the reason why you sent this to me was because the reason for which this was dismissed and maintained was that the government, the court said, we are, what you're doing right now, I took a screenshot of the most relevant part, but it was your highlights, was basically, you're not editing. You're not doing anything that makes you an editor, but it was their definition of what makes you an editor that I presume is the relevant part, that it suggests that anybody who does this then loses Section 230 immunity. Robert, have I misunderstood the purpose for which you sent me that lawsuit?
No, that's precisely right. Basically, Airbnb does not have carte blanche Section 230 immunity for most of their transactions. So what has happened is Michelle Malkin attended a conference that people at Airbnb didn't like. So they did two things. They banned her from ever using Airbnb, but they also banned her husband, who did not attend the conference and is not a public figure, is not a political actor of any kind. They also banned him from ever using Airbnb. And what they've done is they've banned a transaction from occurring. And the focus the Ninth Circuit had is like, you're in the transaction business. You're not in the publishing business. Maybe on occasion you'll be, but most times you're not. So most of the regulations concerning you will be about whether or not you can do a transaction, not whether or not you can censor or discuss or share or platform something. So given that, and given, again, this didn't happen on Airbnb's platform. This isn't saying you can't market in a way that's discriminatory. You can't use discriminatory rhetoric. And Michelle Malkin is a multiracial individual, by the way. They're saying she was promoting white supremacy by showing up at a conference. And again, she's not even a member of that group. She's just speaking her mind. So it's guilt by association. But, it's kind of strange to say that the brown lady is pushing white supremacy, aside from the absurdity of it, if you know Michelle Malkin. So she and her husband both, and maybe it'll be the husband that brings the claim, because it's really, they're now going to prevent family members from engaging in certain transactions that are, often in the modern world, Airbnb has a near monopoly on this market space, prevent you from even renting space for purposes of travel or vacation or transport. So I think that Michelle Malkin has a credible claim and doesn't have the same anti-SLAPP worries or Section 230 worries she would have if she were bringing suit against, say, Twitter or YouTube. So she is looking at bringing suit, or her husband's looking at bringing suit against Airbnb because they've been in this business for a while now, where they've started politically discriminating against people based on their politics because they don't like them. And that's a scary transactional world to get into, because up next is payment processors and banks. Now, payment processors have broader contractual language, but here, to completely ban someone from even using the service, the husband didn't violate any of the terms of service. Michelle Malkin didn't violate any terms of service. They have exceptional, universal, positive reviews from those people they rented it from. The person they rented from had no problem with them renting from them. This is solely Airbnb trying to leverage its market power to discourage and deter certain politics and punish people whose politics they don't like. But again, based on that Ninth Circuit case, it doesn't look like they have Section 230 immunity. And that would mean the Unruh Act in California is one of those laws that prohibits public accommodations and other groups like Airbnb from discriminating based on political affiliation.
It's amazing. Robert, the life is a big circle. It's a big freaking circle. And we were talking about Unruh, and I was being corrected for saying Unruh at the time. It's crazy. Yes, it all comes back. And now, okay, so two things, by the way. Viva Fry, congratulations on being verified on Twitter. Now that, tell Twitter that I now need my account verified. And I learned that I've been verified in a live stream, which I do not care about this stuff. I'm not chasing idolatry. Now, people, if you get an email from me saying invest in Bitcoin and it doesn't have a blue check mark, it's not me, because you would never get that email from me in the first place. But Robert, this was the passage from the decision which I found to be most poignant. This is, okay, we have construed these provisions to extend immunity to: 1, this is Section 230 CDA immunity, a provider or user of an interactive computer service; 2, whom a plaintiff seeks to treat under a state law cause of action as a publisher or speaker; 3, of information provided by another information content provider. But this is where it gets interesting. Although the CDA, the Communications Decency Act, does not define publisher, we have defined, quote, publication, end quote, in this context to, quote, involve reviewing, editing, and deciding whether to publish or to withdraw from publication third-party content. So I'm reading that and I'm saying, goodness gracious, how then does Facebook and other online platforms escape publisher liability as per this definition? That's what I took away from the decision or the order. So am I overreading it, or does that have?
Well, they've come up with excuses on that side of the aisle. They've loosened the language of what constitutes being a publisher if it has any relevance to something somebody said or censoring somebody's speech in any way. They've called that publisher for purposes of immunity. But what they have not done is said every single transaction an online company does is subject to immunity. That's where they've drawn the line, and that's where Airbnb is not in strong territory for this. And given they've made a habit of it, they actually did it after the Trump inauguration. But there it was being instigated by the actual Airbnb host. They were, trying to figure out somebody's politics and discriminating against them. That was a different animal that still could have violated DC law. But here, what's taken place in California, based on that Ninth Circuit precedent, the main deterrent to sue, Section 230 and anti-SLAPP law, would not appear to apply based on that Ninth Circuit precedent. And so Michelle Malkin would appear to have and her husband especially, would have a strong claim under the Unruh Act, named after Jesse Unruh, sort of a progressive, occasionally populist United States senator in California. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think she could help break new ground in that territory. Now, there was a couple of big cases in New York that one will be interesting if it breaks new ground, which is Sarah Palin's suit against the New York Times that is in trial. And then we got the results of another trial where dear Michael Avenatti has been convicted of yet another crime. He's already helped predict about 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, he's already in jail for the fraud against Nike. So I mean, how does that work? Like, someone's in jail, they're already serving time?
He got out on other grounds temporarily because he still faces a bunch of cases, criminal cases in California. So and one had a mistrial, so that's set for retrial. So he's convicted on Nike, now convicted of stealing from Stormy Daniels, stole her book profits while lying to her, faces additional criminal prosecutions in California. The sentencing has been light so far for Avenatti, so we'll see if they give him real sentences. But can they keep giving him low sentences when it's conviction after conviction after conviction of fraud after fraud after fraud? I detailed this guy's fraud from day one when the mainstream media was singing his praises, and predicted that he would go to jail or be criminally prosecuted before Trump left the White House, and that, of course, happened. And he'll still be in jail when Trump comes back to the White House.
And full shout out to Inner City Press covering it day in and day out. I got my news from him. It's amazing stuff. I have not been following it as closely as I should have, but it's just,
all he did was attack her basically because she apparently talks to dead people and stuff like that. But it didn't matter. Everything was in writing and in the bank statements. So, Avenatti represented himself. That didn't turn out so well.
What is it, Robert? What is it before I taint my own ears for our next shirt? Always?
Oh, never in writing, always in cash. Avenatti broke both rules, and now he's going to the Who's Cow.
Never in writing, always in cash. It's done. Grant Smith, who's apparently very ripped in the back, says, I'm undertaking an unofficial effort to start candid public conversation on topics that I strongly feel must be addressed in the Army over the platform that Glenn Greenwald uses to avoid censorship at grantsmith.forbidden.com. Okay, first of all, Grant, thank you very much. And yet your lats are huge, as are your traps. If I know my stuff, Robert.
The other big trial that the media's been trying to keep a lid on is Sarah Palin's case against the New York Times.
I'm out of touch and out of speed with this. What's the deal? And it went to trial. They finally had their trial despite COVID delays. What's the status?
So it's been going on all week, and it turned out, of course, there's a lot of embarrassing emails by the New York Times. It turns out what was really interesting is the person who wrote the first draft of the hit piece, I believe is Elizabeth Williamson, who coincidentally is the person always writing hit pieces on Alex Jones for the New York Times. So what's exactly her motivation? And can somebody trust someone that's now been proven in court to be a known libeler, a known defamer? But the own New York Times staff flagged the editorial. This was the editorial that once again lied about Sarah Palin somehow being connected to the shooting of Congresswoman Gifford. It was a lie at the time. It was still a lie. They repeated it. Even the New York Times had recognized in the past it was a lie. They regurgitated it, take another hit piece at Palin, disguised it in the editorial section so they thought they could somehow be immune from it. You're not. Putting things in editorial doesn't change when you make factual assertions that are false. And in this context, aside from the interesting, the person who writes the hit pieces on Alex Jones being deeply involved in this libel, is that the New York Times own people flagged it right away. And they said, by the way, this isn't accurate. This isn't right. And the New York Times went and published it anyway. And remember, this is a case that the district court originally dismissed, allowing this evidence to never be discovered. And only because it was reversed on appeal at the Second Circuit do we now know this information, which came out at trial. And so rather than fess up publicly, rather than media meaningfully cover this misinformation, this libel, this known libel with actual malice. So what a lot of us have said that's why I tell people when they file a libel suit, allege upon information and belief what you believe discovery will show, because that will get you past a lot of motions to dismiss. And that's what we had here. Once you get into it, you find, unsurprisingly, the New York Times knew they were libeling. They knew it, and they went ahead and did it anyway.
I'm getting a lot of chats, Robert, as we're talking, and text messages that the police are actually coming in and arresting people on in Ottawa. It's terrible. We'll see where this goes. It will not go to a Tiananmen Square. It's just going to go to a. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, they'll probably do mass arrest and then try to secure the facility.
I'm tempted to drive down tonight, but I know that I can't do that. I can drive down first thing tomorrow morning, which will make no difference in terms of what's going on. All right, Robert, the question I have to ask, because I was just talking about it with my dad, Don Lemon's lawsuit. What's the status of that, and what is the latest?
Oh, no updates yet. Waiting on the court to issue some orders. But speaking of interesting CNN news, of course, Jeff Zucker had to exit CNN, and the official pretext was a story some of us and others in the media have known about for years, which is Zucker's propensity to promote certain people that are providing some extra benefits, employee with benefits, I guess you might call it. But the real story is twofold, and part of it's now leaked out, so I can discuss it, because this was originally shared with me several months ago. The one is that the Zucker and his girlfriend / employee were deeply involved in protecting Governor Andrew Cuomo. They were coordinating that. Chris Cuomo used it to leverage a $9 million payout for getting fired when he was rightfully fired, because in fact Zucker was coordinating this the whole time on behalf of Andrew Cuomo to cover up and hide his misconduct. And a lot of Zucker's conduct, of course, got first publicly outed by Project Veritas and James O'Keefe with their CNN whistleblower, disclosing the kind of conversations Zucker was directing every day for their newsroom. On top of that, CNN is potentially involved in a corporate merger that involves a former media magnate who is a major Trump supporter, who has an interest in cleaning up CNN so that might actually put the news back in cable news network. And so that's the other backstory that's occurring. That too got publicly out. I hinted at it for our locals board last week, but it was interesting to see. Now, speaking of some interesting lawsuits, the Miami Dolphins former head coach Brian Flores got turned down for the New York Giants job and decided to react by throwing a hissy fit and saying the whole NFL is just a bunch of racist. Retold some stories about the Denver Broncos that John Elway said are just patently false. Made some allegations against the Miami Dolphins owner. He claims those are patently false. But actually, none of the allegations concern evidence of racial discrimination. They concern whether NFL owners are not following their own internal rules in terms of coaching interview process, in terms of trying to tamper potentially with Miami Dolphins, trying to get Tom Brady. None of the Miami Dolphins supposedly owner offering money trying to bribe the coach effectively to lose games to get a higher draft pick. Those are all be NFL rule violations, but none of them have anything to do with race. Indeed, the NFL has made, as Clay Travis mentions, more black millionaires than any institution in America. And so it's a little bit unusual to accuse them of racism, and has often had more black head coaches and black assistant coaches than is their share of the population of potential coaches. Because unlike the player profile, which again is overwhelmingly African American, the potential coaching pool looks mostly like America. And the only people underrepresented generally are Asians and Latinos, not African Americans. Right now, there's only one black coach, but that's abnormal for the last decade or so. And there's 6 open coaching jobs, for which some, probably several will go to black coaches, and they'll be back to being, frankly, overrepresented compared to the population. And so it appears to me to be a frivolous suit that the institutional media loves the narrative of, so they've run with it rather than be skeptical of it, as Clay Travis has rightfully been. I don't think the suit has any chance of meaningfully going forward legally. I think ultimately it'd be dismissed probably at the summary judgment stage. It appeared to be more of a political ploy to blackmail the NFL effectively into getting putting more pressure for them to appoint people based on their race, appoint more black coaches. And that's what I think the goal and objective was, rather than I don't think there's any evidence that I saw from the suit of actual racial discrimination, racial animus by the NFL.
And if anyone's wondering why I'm so quiet, it's because I know nothing of this lawsuit. So nothing, not one iota. I don't watch NFL, and I don't really oftentimes read NFL lawsuits. So I've got nothing to add to that, except to say, Robert, before we get into the end game of tonight's stream, have we missed a subject that we were supposed to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we covered all of the different potential claims. One of my favorite ones is that people are suing Disney because the Star Wars movies sucked, and they're like, we were lied to because you said these were going to be good, and these totally, utterly sucked.
Oh, well, if that succeeds, God bless. There's going to be a new standard for movies. But bringing this all full circle back to what's going on in Canada. I'm reading the chats. It really makes me want to jump in a car right now and drive, and I can't, and I'm not. So don't get any hopes up. Portland Andy is live streaming. Ottawa, as last I checked, was live streaming. I hope he still is. I think I might be going down first thing tomorrow morning, and I'll get there, and we'll see what's going on.
For everyone who's there was one other suit.
Go for it, please.
Speaking of a legitimate civil rights suit, Black New Yorkers have brought a class action claim against the city of New York because the city of New York extended voting rights for all the political offices and public offices in the city of New York to people who are not citizens of the United States. And some of them were dumb enough to make overt statements about how they're doing this because they like the politics of these groups and because they like the racial identities of these groups, which, guess what, is not black. And so the point of the suit is, one, they're being overtly, openly motivated by racial animus, which is in violation of the law. And secondly, they're deliberately diluting the black voting power in the city of New York. And that this appears to be part of their overt objective. And that too, under the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, that's been interpreted. Originally, it was intended to make sure ex-slaves had all protected constitutional rights. It's been interpreted to mean that if there's disparate impact by the law, you don't even have to prove intended animus, though they have evidence of it here. If you have disparate impact on a particular racial group, then they can bring a claim. And so it looks like a very robust claim, and it's in all likelihood the city of New York trying to allow illegals and non-citizens to vote in New York will be struck down as unconstitutional under the 15th Amendment.
But even still, so people are going to say, well, that will extend to presidential elections. Explain the difference between state elections and federal elections.
Well, it would apply across the board. In other words, any effort to extend the vote to non-citizens will dilute the vote of Black Americans, given the profile of non-citizens. And consequently, they will always have a 15th Amendment claim. So if this case wins, it will set a precedent against the other cities, counties, or any state considering trying to do so.
All right. So Cats Muse at places. I watch Canada all day. I'm with y'all in spirit. Well, we're going to see because it's bottom line. The protesters should never get violent. Let them get hauled off, like Artur Pavlovsky, cuffed behind his back, being dragged out. Let them drag out every single person. Peaceful protest, so that you don't resort to the same tactics they're resorting to in public opinion with people who might hopefully be able to amplify the message without distorting the message. And I consider myself to be in that group. Can do it. So no lashing.
Instead of
out, no
letters
nothing.
from Birmingham jail, you'll have letters from Ottawa jail.
It's Robert. It makes me sick. It makes me a little disgusted. It's deliberate antagonism. The question is going to be: can this protest hold out in the way, despite what appears to be the government affront to the right to peacefully assembly? And it is peaceful. I don't care if it's distracting or disruptive. That's what it is. If they do this and people get arrested and hauled off, it will not be Tiananmen Square in the same sense. It just might be Tiananmen Square in the same consequence. So may that happen, but I might have to be there by 10:30 tomorrow morning. We'll see. Robert, what do we expect in the coming week out of the States, not out of Canada?
So there'll probably be some more vaccine mandate case development, more mask mandate case development. So that will continue to run apace because there's so many cases pending in so many places. And then otherwise it'll just be, we do not lack for legal news here in the United States in the last couple of years.
What a time to be alive. Like I said, at one point, I didn't want the channel becoming the COVID channel. The channel's not going to become the Ottawa channel either. But when this is done, we're going to apply the strict scrutiny of public observation to everything that's going on in the world. Let me just bring this chat out. Okay, hold on. There was a truck full of rocks. So also, I have no way of verifying any of these comments or chats. So it's not gospel. But I will walk the streets tomorrow in as much as I'm allowed. And I might have to. The wife will deal with it. Robert, for anyone who doesn't know, where can they find us so I can clip this last clip and use it as the new outro? Oh, sorry. One thing. Locals is going to make the determination, but is my new avatar scary or appropriate? I'd like to know. 1 is good, 2 is bad, but locals will make the determination. Robert, where can people find us?
Yeah, for exclusive information and news on a constant, continuous basis, including all the information that's censored here on YouTube, will be freely available there. You can find us at Viva, barneslaw.locals.com.
My kid, Robert, if you can believe it, Ethan is in the car. He goes, vivalaw.locals.com. It's crazy. So, I can't even read of the numbers coming in, whether or not I'm going to run a non-definitive poll in YouTube. But look, I'll be there. I think I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there tomorrow. I'll have to apologize to people in the house, and I'm going to do it. Robert, this has been enlightening and amazing as always. Give us a white pill, because I think I need it, seeing what's going on in Canada.
Well, Michael Malice is writing a book called White Pill, but I think what your interviews of the people on the streets in Ottawa is as good a white pill as any that people have seen in quite some time. Ordinary, everyday people standing up, having fun singing, having fun playing hockey in the streets, not worried about whether the cops or the military or anybody else is coming down for them, because they're standing up for everyday rights and doing it in the workaday way they have done their whole lives. And the honking will continue until freedom returns.
I'm going to leave it at that before I actually burst into tears. So everyone, thank you very much. Robert, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Who do we have Wednesday for Sidebar?
It's open. We have every other Wednesday scheduled for the next month, but not this one. So still waiting to hear back from some folks.
Okay, and we will find someone amazingly interesting. So everyone, with that said, thank you for the chats. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the super chats, the support, everything. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Robert, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Everyone, enjoy the week.